The Picture of Dorian Gray, as described in Oscar Wilde's novel, is a painting that contains Dorian's soul. It bears the burden of his sins, it ages and shows externally how his soul is rotting inside through his misdeeds, while he himself remains unchanged. This novel explores what happens when we believe that we don't have a conscience, that nothing we do is of any consequence, or that life has no inherent meaning. So today we're going to explore the story of Dorian Gray's psychological descent from an innocent, beautiful and naive young man into a nihilistic hedonist who murders his closest friend. We'll also explore how, during Dorian Gray's time in the Victorian era, the ceremony of afternoon tea could be a metaphor for said hedonism during the Decadent movement. Dorian is first described as an innocent young man, bright-eyed and naive. Whilst he's being painted by his greatest admirer and painter, Basil Hallward, and watched by Basil's friend, Lord Henry, they comment excessively on his beauty. Lord Henry describes Dorian. He was certainly wonderfully handsome, with his finely curved scarlet lips, his frank blue eyes, his crisp golden hair. There was something in his face that made one trust him at once. He had kept himself unspotted from the world. No wonder Basil Hallward worshipped him. They commented so much that Dorian becomes absorbed in himself, like Narcissus, who drowned in his own reflection. Afraid that he would lose his beauty, he shouts into the universe a desperate prayer that he would do anything not to change externally from today, for the painting to change instead. He says, "If it were I who was to be always young, and the picture that was to grow old, for that I would give everything. I would give my soul for that." His wish is granted, and throughout the book, Dorian starts to change, but only internally. He moves further and further from common moral laws in the Victorian era and towards hedonism, valuing the pleasure and sensual experiences in life above all else. Dorian commits his first sin after he breaks his engagement to an actress because she had a bad performance, and it's actually because she ended up falling in love with him and seeing the world for what it is. She started to change in his eyes from his idea of what she should be, which is a work of art, and she becomes a real person. After this, she commits suicide, and this is the first time the painting changes, and he's shocked by what happens. He becomes obsessed with the idea that the painting changes through his misdeeds, and instead of seeing what's wrong and trying to correct it, he uses the painting as a way of monitoring his conscience. So he ends up creating his own reality and viewing her death as a form of art instead of facing his sins. This starts a downward spiral into his deepening madness, where he ends up living the life of a hedonist that only wants to experience the world through his senses. This descent deepens until one fateful night, Basil visits him and begs Dorian to be good again, that everyone can be saved, even him. Enraged by these comments and the fact that Basil created the painting that Dorian has become a slave to, he murders Basil. This story is a cautionary tale of what happens when art is created for life's sake, or rather, when our subjective interpretation of art leads to our own demise. In Dorian's case, he lets the painting become his own conscience rather than just letting it be a painting, and it ends up consuming his thoughts and dictating his actions. And this is where I don't want to spoil the story any further, but I want to explore the connection of the aesthetic movement and afternoon tea, something Dorian would surely have enjoyed. When Wilde published this novel in 1890, the United Kingdom was already facing the material impacts of the Industrial Revolution. Child labour laws were introduced to protect children from harsh working conditions. Slavery was abolished in 1833 by the Acts of William Wilberforce. There was growing evangelicalism, emphasising the scripture of the Bible, moving away from liturgical practices that defined Catholicism. And in 1858 there was the publishing of The Theory of Evolution by Charles Darwin. So all in all, Victorian society was becoming more morally aware and increasingly divided. As this moralism became more extreme, there were those like Wilde that wanted to challenge the status quo. The Decadent movement began taking shape in France from the 1850s and was the direct opposite of Victorian morality. It was focused on experiencing the senses, promoting hedonism, and celebrating beauty, rather than finding moral guidance in the world. The aesthetic movement was the artistic expression of decadence, of the idea that art has inherent value because it's beautiful, that art should be created for art's sake. This novel was then used to explore these themes, to explore what happens when we give art too much meaning, as Dorian Gray did, and perhaps drive ourselves mad. These ideas were taken to the extreme through Dorian's actions to challenge the views of popular thought at the time, and they worked in causing moral panic. It's here that we can also understand the concept of how afternoon tea emerged. Afternoon tea originated in the 1840s when the 7th Duchess of Bedford wanted to stave hunger between lunch and a late dinner by inviting her friends over for tea, bread, and cakes. Over time, it became a ritual of the senses and a celebration of hedonism. Fine porcelain was used to display elaborate cakes and brew expensive teas from India and China. The ladies also wore looser garments, free of corsets, symbolizing a loosening of the strict moral code imposed on women at the time. So it became a way of enjoying the external pleasures of life through the senses of taste, touch, smell, sight, and importantly of indulging in gossip. In the novel, there are several mentions of tea being served in elaborate plates. 2 globe-shaped china dishes were brought in by the page. Dorian Gray went over and poured out the tea. There's also a mention of tea cakes being served at an afternoon tea party at the end of the book. The young men in elaborate suits were handing tea cakes to some of the women. I found a recipe for tea cakes from the most famous Victorian cookbook, Mrs. Beeton's book on household management. There's also a recipe in here for cucumber sandwiches, which was actually one of Oscar Wilde's personal favourites to have for afternoon tea. So these are the 2 that we're going to make. For the tea cakes, I'm mixing 200 grams of flour, a pinch of salt, and a tablespoon of sugar. I'm then adding 22 grams of softened butter and rubbing this into the flour. I then add 50 grams of raisins to this. This is optional, but it does taste really nice. In a separate measuring jug, I'm adding 120 grams of milk, and I warm this slightly. Add 1 egg and mix this together. We're going to add a 7-gram sachet of dried yeast and slowly pour the wet mixture into the dry mixture until it comes together. You won't need all of the wet mixture, so keep an eye on the consistency. Then knead this for about 10 minutes and leave it covered for about an hour and a half, or until it's doubled in size. In the meantime, we're going to thinly slice some cucumber, add salt, leave this for about an hour. After an hour, we're going to pat this dry, cut up a few slices of bread, season the cucumber with a generous amount of black pepper, apple cider vinegar or lemon juice, and some olive oil. To assemble the cucumber sandwiches, simply butter both sides of the bread, add the thin slices of cucumber, and cut them into the shapes that you desire. Once the tea cakes have risen, you're going to make small balls out of these. I made about 5, and you're going to cover them and let them rise for another 10 to 15 minutes. Brush on some of the remaining egg and milk mixture from earlier, and put these in the oven for about 15 to 30 minutes. At 200 degrees Celsius, we're going to brew this Darjeeling tea for about 3 minutes, and it's best to serve these tea cakes warm. So I'll start by pouring the tea. So this is Darjeeling tea. Really nice. Okay, I'm gonna put the tea to the side. Let's start with the cucumber sandwiches first. Surprisingly pleasant. I like the combination of the butter and the cucumber. This would be a really nice sandwich to eat in the summertime. Let's try one of these tea cakes now. Let's try this one first. The traditional way to have this is with some butter. That's delicious. I really enjoyed the raisins inside the tea cakes. I think this is a great selection of food to have if you're hungry between early lunch and a late dinner. Thank you everyone for watching this video on The Picture of Dorian Gray. Let me know down below what your favourite treats are to have for afternoon tea and what story you think would be interesting to cover next.